In 48 hours, a single numbers game played out in the Red Sea that should have terrified every taxpayer in the United States, but instead, the mainstream media reported it as a series of successful intercepts. They told you the missiles hit their targets. They told you the Navy performed perfectly. They are wrong. What we are actually witnessing is the total collapse of the 20th century cost imposition model of warfare. This is not a story about military defense. This is a story about a mathematical insolvency that is currently being baked into the American defense budget, a reckoning that is going to force a choice between defending global trade and maintaining the solvency of the U.S. Treasury. This is the math that will shake the U.S. economy, and nobody in Washington is willing to tell you how deep the hole actually goes. I'm going to show you exactly how a $50,000 piece of hobbyist technology is currently bankrupting the most sophisticated military machine in human history. We are going to look at the internal memos from the Pentagon that admit this trajectory is unsustainable. We are going to look at the industrial capacity of the primary manufacturers, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and I will show you why, even if we had the money, we no longer have the time. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand that the security of your retirement, the stability of the dollar, and the price of every container landing in Long Beach is currently hanging by a thread that costs $2 million an inch to maintain. If you're new here, subscribe to Daily Brief right now. Hit the notification bell because in the hours ahead, this story is going to move fast. Let's go back, not 72 hours. Let's go back further to the early 2000s when the Aegis combat system and the Standard Missile family were finalized as the gold standard of maritime dominance. At the time, the threat profile was state on state. We were building $2 million interceptors to stop $50 million fighter jets or $100 million warships. The math worked. It was a favorable cost exchange ratio. You spend 2 to save 100. That is sound economic logic. But while we were perfecting the precision of the SM-2 and the SM-6 missiles, the world changed. Beginning in 2014, as reported by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a shift toward asymmetric attrition began. Warning signs were visible to insiders. The drone strikes on Saudi Aramco facilities in 2019 were the first massive red flag. Low-cost, slow-moving, off-the-shelf components were used to bypass multi-billion-dollar radar arrays. The Pentagon saw it. The GAO issued reports on it, but the industrial complex stayed the course because there is no profit in a $50,000 solution. There is only profit in the $2 million interceptor. Now that misalignment of incentives has become a national security emergency. Let's break down the economic math of this collapse. We must look at this through the lens of 4 distinct components. Component 1, the interceptor premium. According to Navy budget documents and the Department of Defense's own procurement tables, a single RIM-66 Standard Missile 2 costs roughly $2.1 million. The more advanced SM-6, often used for high-end threats, sits at nearly $4.3 million per shot. In the Red Sea, over the last 6 months, the U.S. Navy has fired dozens of these to intercept Houthi-launched Shahed-style drones. Component 2, the drone floor. Intelligence briefings from the UK Ministry of Defense and Jane's Defense Weekly value these Iranian-designed drones at between $20,000 and $50,000. Stop. Let that land. To stop a $20,000 threat, we are spending $12,000, $100,000. That is a 100-to-1 negative cost exchange ratio. Component 3, the Salvo reality. In modern aerial combat, you don't fire 1 interceptor per target, you fire 2. It's called shoot, shoot, look. You want to ensure the kill. That means for every $20,000 drone, the American taxpayer is actually incinerating $4.2 million. Component 4, the industrial throughput. According to reporting from Politico and the Financial Times, the United States currently produces fewer than 100 SM-6 missiles per year. In a sustained conflict, we could burn through an entire year's worth of production in a single weekend. The math is clear. The United States is currently trying to win a war of attrition where the enemy's ammunition is effectively free, and our ammunition is a handcrafted luxury good that takes 2 years to replenish. If you live in an American city and you wonder why the infrastructure is crumbling while the national debt ticks toward $35 trillion, look at the Red Sea. We are firing Ferraris at flying lawnmowers. Take a step inside the room where these decisions are made. Imagine the Pentagon's Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Office. There is a fundamental clash happening between 2 camps. On one side, you have the traditionalists, the advocates for exquisite capability. Their argument is that we cannot afford to lose a single billion-dollar destroyer, so we must use the best interceptors regardless of cost. On the other side, you find the realists, who are warning that we are being demonetized off the ocean. As one senior naval official privately admitted to the U.S. Naval Institute, we are using high-end, exquisite munitions to solve a volume problem. The Houthis, backed by Iranian tactical advisors, aren't trying to sink the ships. They don't have to. They are trying to empty our magazines. They know that every time a VLS cell on a destroyer clicks empty, that ship has to leave the station, sail to a specialized port, and spend weeks refitting. They are winning by forcing us to spend ourselves into a corner. The consequences of this math cascade far beyond the military. Let's trace the second-order effects. First, there is the insurance spiral. Lloyd's of London and other major maritime insurers have already hiked war risk premiums for Red Sea transit by over 900% since the escalation began. When the U.S. Navy cannot guarantee a cost-effective defense, the private sector prices in the chaos. This hits the household level immediately. If you are buying goods today, you are paying the Red Sea premium on every item that transit through the Suez Canal. Second, there is the opportunity cost. That $300 billion warning isn't just a number. It's the projected cost of a sustained naval presence in a high-threat environment over the next decade if we don't pivot. That is $300 billion that cannot go toward the domestic semiconductor industry or the energy transition. Nobody is connecting these dots. The drone versus missile math is actually a primary driver of future inflation. If the U.S. is forced to retreat from global naval policing because the math no longer works, the era of safe seas and cheap goods is over. We are moving from a globalized economy to a fortress economy, where shipping costs double because the global sheriff can no longer afford the bullets. If this analysis is making sense to you, hit like. It helps the algorithm push this data past the surface-level headlines. We are now facing two distinct paths. Path one is the technological pivot. In this scenario, the Pentagon fast-tracks directed energy weapons, lasers, and high-powered microwave systems. These systems have a cost per shot of about $1. They use electricity instead of $2 million rocket motors. If the U.S. can deploy these within the next 24 months, we restore the math. We make it expensive for the enemy to attack and cheap for us to defend. This is the optimistic path, but it requires breaking the grip of the traditional prime defense contractors who make their billions on expendable missiles, not permanent lasers. Path two is the attrition spiral. In this scenario, we continue to use the Standard missile family to swat down drones. We exhaust our stockpiles. Seeing this weakness, other adversaries in the Pacific and Eastern Europe begin coordinating low-cost drone swarms. The U.S. is forced to make a gut-wrenching choice: protect the commercial shipping lanes for the global economy, or preserve our dwindling missile stocks for a potential great power war. We chose the latter. Global trade fractures. The Suez Canal becomes a graveyard of abandoned routes. Inflation in the West becomes structural and permanent because the just-in-time supply chain cannot survive an environment where defense is 100 times more expensive than offense. This is the path we are currently on. The single variable we cannot control is how fast our adversaries realize that they don't need to win a battle to win the war. They just need to keep us firing. This is not just a military briefing. This is a structural transformation of the world order. For 80 years, American hegemony was built on the fact that we could outproduce and outspend anyone. That era is ending because the math has flipped. The cheap is defeating the expensive. The many are defeating the few. We are watching the end of high-end dominance in real time. I want to hear from you. Do you believe the U.S. should continue to spend millions per shot to keep the shipping lanes open? Or is it time to admit that the current model of global policing is mathematically bankrupt? Specifically, what happens to the U.S. consumer when the Navy buffer is gone? I read every single one of your comments. This is Daily Brief. Subscribe if you haven't. This story isn't over. It's barely begun.